before we go into our interview today, I wanted to let everyone know we have a new sponsor for our Energy Question podcast, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, or USOGA for short. First established in 1917, USOGA has been an effective and creative voice for the industry for more than a century now. USOGA is dedicated to educating the public, policymakers, and legislators at the federal, state, and local levels about the value of the domestic oil and natural gas industry. If you're in the industry and not currently a USOGA member, please consider joining the association as a way of helping it tell your story to the policymakers whose actions impact everything you do each and every day. You can start that process by contacting USOGA through its website, usoga.org. Thanks so much to USOGA for sponsoring the Energy Question podcast. And now on with our show. Hi, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. I'm your host, David Blackmon, and my very special guest today is one of my favorite radio personalities and podcasters, Jacki, the host of the Jacki Daily show at Blaze Media. Jacki, how are you today?
I'm doing great today, David. How are you?
Just wonderful, just wonderful. I'm so glad you were able and willing to do this episode with me. I so enjoy our conversations. We did an episode of your own show about a month ago and had a great discussion that I want to be sure my audience gets a flavor of around Robert F. Kennedy and his campaign for the presidency and how that might impact have consequences, I think, that many people are not anticipating, and negative consequences when it comes to the energy business. But first, before we go to that, at the end of that episode, you did about a 5-minute monologue that I just thought was so terrific about the recent effort to impeach Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Mainly by Republicans in the House of Representatives, but also Democrats. And the threat and just so everyone knows, Jacki's a lawyer. She's a pretty brilliant lawyer. And so her opinion on this is something you need to really understand and pay attention to. But I just thought that was so compelling that I would like to talk to you about that and why the way that was conducted, in so much of it in secret and without public scrutiny, is really kind of a threat to all of our rights to due process. So talk about why you think that threat exists because of that.
So, I mean, I took the position of being, if I were a legislator, because I used to work in a legislature in Washington, D.C. on the U.S. House side, what would I do? And the answer is, there's no way I could have voted to impeach Ken Paxton because there was no proper due process for that result. There was one member who said he did a great job. His name is Smithy, Smith with 2 E's at the end, Smithy.
Yeah.
He laid out precisely, he's a great lawyer, exactly what was wrong with the due process. If you want the full download on that, check out his testimony. It's about 20 minutes long, and he'll lay it out for you. Basically, when you have a process in place before you take away a right or a job or whatever you're taking away, all civilized peoples have rules for how that's done. In our criminal system, people are reasonably familiar with what you're entitled to. In a criminal trial, you would be, entitled to counsel. You would be entitled to marshal witnesses in your favor, present evidence in your favor, confront the witnesses against you, or cross-examine the other side. Give your side of the story. And the House Republicans claimed, oh, you only get that over in the Senate when you're tried as if in a trial. And you don't get it here, even though everyone who's ever been impeached in this House got it before. There's a reason why they got it before. I'm gonna take my jacket off. I'm already so angry. I'm like breaking out into sweat.
I don't blame you. This all makes me pretty angry too.
I'm telling you, this was and done by Republicans, which is also rather shameful, because a house divided against itself cannot stand.
Yeah.
That's the result of what they've done. Even though Paxton won, it's a house divided, a literal house divided.
Yeah, literally, yes.
And so basically, the talking point that went out that is false, that a lot of people believe because people they respect are saying it, is that the House impeachment is like a grand jury. Therefore, he wasn't entitled to all of these rights. Okay, actually, it's really not like a grand jury. People would be shocked to learn how grand juries work in this country.
Yeah.
I compared it on my show to, it would be like having your ex-spouse walk in front of a grand jury, you don't know anything about it, and just fire away at you with one side of a story. And then, they get to vote on one side of the story. You really don't get those rights in a grand jury. You don't get to even know what's going on. You don't get to present a defense. All they need is a certain level of proof, which is way lower than beyond a reasonable doubt what you would get in a real trial. So they don't have to find you guilty. They simply have to find that there's probable cause and all this to bring on a trial against you. Well, that didn't happen in the House, but everyone's throwing that talking point around. And I'm talking about very sophisticated, very smart, well-informed people, because they don't know, apparently, that when the Texas House impeaches, you get a lot more than that historically. There were three referenced, particularly by Mr. Smithy, and he lays it out. No, actually, they got lots of time as members of the House to deliberate, to actually consider all of the evidence. They didn't get 24 hours, he said, before they knew they were going to vote on this. How could
Right.
you
He didn't know
possibly
anything about it until the day before it was announced. It's just crazy. And when you look at that, I mean, this is something that even Nancy Pelosi didn't resort to, and the two sham impeachments of President Trump. And it's just so disturbing to me. And I know you're a Republican as well, and I'm a Republican, that my members of my own political party were willing to be a part of a process like this is truly extraordinary, I think, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, apparently there was no record. You would have a record, even in a grand jury, there's evidence, there's a record. They might deliberate for a long time. Certainly historically in the Texas House, you would get the chance to show up. It would be public, that they would even start the process would be made public, because after all, you're removing the person that the people voted for by double digits. I mean, that was the Attorney General the Texans said they want, even though they knew about these allegations that were brought for the impeachment. They already knew all that. Either they didn't believe it, or they had serious doubts that it was true, or they didn't believe that the allegations were mostly even crimes, which is so common these days. They're not. You end up getting people, when prosecutors don't have a case, they end up going after people for things like obstruction or false statement. Right. Because these are processed crimes, because they couldn't get you on a substantive crime. So you said this here or that over there, and they'll pretend they're contradictory, and now you have to defend yourself. And it looks really bad. There are a lot of people who don't know the difference between an indictment and a conviction. When a headline goes out that says there's an indictment, it has a really bad effect, almost as bad as a conviction, when in fact, you haven't been proven guilty of anything. So, and that was also part of Paxton's story, which is that he had to have more than one, or excuse me, the prosecutors had to have more than one grand jury sit to get an indictment on him in the first place. A lot of Texans don't know that in this state, you can just keep sitting grand juries until you get the indictment. That's an outrage. And so people are working on fixing that.
But a grand jury is different, right? It's part of the judicial system, and those rules are there. The Texas legislature is an elected body that's subject to the open meetings law, which anyone who's ever served in any capacity to which that applies is enforced pretty strictly, typically in our state government. How can the House of Representatives claim that doing all of this in secret is in any way legitimate, when, in light of the open meetings, I mean, how are they not being prosecuted for violating the Open Meetings Act? I just don't understand.
Yeah, I don't know. I did see that Paxton has filed some complaints with some DAs against the House managers,
Yeah.
actually for doxing his address, which the DAs were saying, you're right. So there's actually a law against that now in Texas, and the DAs are saying, well, it doesn't apply to public officials. How convenient. I'm getting really tired of public officials being exempt from the decency rules that the rest of us have to abide by, including defamation, by the way. As a general rule, a public official who's speaking in their public capacity about a matter of public concern is immune from being sued for defamation.
Yeah.
We do that for prosecutors for a special reason because, generally speaking, they don't always know at a certain state of the progression of a case whether or not someone's guilty, and obviously they're implying they could be or might be. We want them to be able to do their jobs. So sometimes people have to speak freely. We have a speech and debate clause in the federal Congress for a good reason. We want them to be able to speak freely. But sometimes these things go too far, and it's just a blank check, just carte blanche for people to spout off at the mouth and harm people any way they want with words. So that too is a problem. But in the case of Paxton, if they can violate the due process rights of the chief law enforcement officer of the state, who can't they do that to? And maybe that's the message they're trying to send,
Right.
It's just shameful because this is a Republican-led House. And this perplexes people around the country. You can easily understand. They would ask, why, if he's innocent, would his own tribe go against him? And there are a lot of answers that could slide in there. We'd have to speculate as to all of their reasons. But if you live here, you have some ideas maybe of why. It's not uncommon that there's infighting inside a political party and people vying for position. And if he had been taken out as Attorney General, someone else would have stood to gain from that. So anyway, the point is a threat to the due process rights of anyone is a threat to everyone. And a threat there is a threat everywhere in Texas. It's really disconcerting to watch the wheels come off, not just of rogue prosecutors around the country or rogue governors, but here in Texas, in our Republican-controlled House. It's really upsetting. And look, it came close. In the Senate, he came very close. It was not some resounding Paxton victory. And I thought that was so wrong. I don't even see how you reach the merits of the case, which is what he was actually charged with. When, I wouldn't even reach the merits. If I were a member or a senator, I would say, forget about it. I reject the validity of these proceedings in their entirety from right now. If you want to go back and do this right, then okay. But otherwise, we're not doing it. So,
but even on the merits, I mean, I watched those proceedings pretty religiously, and I got to say, man, Tony Busby, I mean, really destroyed the prosecution's case. And I have nothing but respect for Rusty Hardin and all those lawyers that were on the prosecution side. But I mean, it just seemed like at the end of that trial, there really wasn't an element of the case that the prosecution had tried to present that Busby didn't just put in the shredder. And it was really shocking to me that 10 or 11 or even more than that were willing to vote to convict at the end of that fiasco. It was really frightening. The whole thing was just really frightening to me.
I just cannot imagine any excuse for that.
Yeah.
And these are some people who I know and like. I'm perplexed. I haven't had a chance to ask them, but I will. Just give me the bullet points why that was okay.
Right. I would love to hear the speaker explain why all of that was just fine. It's really amazing that a Republican Speaker of the House would have even been willing to contemplate presiding over a process like that. Really shocking to me, frankly.
Yeah, and at the end of it, we all lost because even we lost our attorney general of choice for a couple of months because effective immediately when they voted to impeach, he was out of the seat. You know, he's no longer our attorney general. So someone else who we didn't vote for has to take over. And you know, we know Paxton's probably the strongest AG in America. What's important to understand is the attorney general of the states, the 50 states. Those 50 people are probably the biggest barrier against the incursion of federal power into our lives,
Yeah.
which is already out of control. But there's no greater thorn in the side to the Biden administration than Ken Paxton. And so he's a target. And he's when he has a win in court, it's not just a win for Texans often. It is a precedent that then applies, that can be pulled from by the other 49 attorneys general around the country. Or maybe it goes up to federal courts and it applies to an entire circuit or the country. So what he does benefits everybody. I mean, everyone. It's hard to overstate the importance of the Attorney General of Texas. There are a
Yeah.
handful of others who are really great. Most of them are wimps. Most of them are cowards. They don't do what they could do. Believe me, I've talked with those that are strong and are doing a great job. Shout out to, in the past, Jeff Landry of Louisiana has been very good.
Yes. Yes.
Morrissey over in
Future
West
governor.
Virginia. I mean, there are just a handful of people who are doing really good work. But most of them, you know, I'm afraid that they're more interested in having no incidents on their watch than in fighting
Right.
and
Right.
taking some risks.
Yeah. And I think that had a lot to do with why they went after Paxton, frankly, because it didn't just take him off the playing field. It froze the entire attorney general's office in terms of challenging the energy agenda of the Biden administration, which Paxton had done many times and pretty successfully, winning about 70% of his challenges, and took them completely off the board for 6 months. And they're only now really starting to get back up and running because so much of the staff was lost in the meantime. And yeah, it's a really tough situation for us here in Texas, I think.
I think so too. I mean, I'm so glad he's back. And I am concerned about what happens in the next primary season because this has exposed a divide that we all knew was there. But I mean, now people are showing what side they're on. And I don't know how this all plays out, but the division can't be good. And it just seems like there's a handful of people who are doing most of the aggression and causing most of the problem. And then, you know, the base gets blamed.
Right.
They're
Right.
not in control in Austin. They're just
Yeah,
not.
I agree. And speaking of the next election, let's talk about RFK Jr. And his campaign. Now he's going to run as an independent, which I think you and I both knew was coming
Yes.
months ago,
Yes.
inevitable. And he, you know, the Democrats are pretending to be very upset with him about this. There's even some polls out now that show him taking more votes away from Biden than from Trump. I think the hook here to energy is the fact that RFK Jr., for those who don't know, has pledged to outlaw hydraulic fracturing if he's elected president. That's a key part of his agenda that would destroy the domestic oil and gas industry in our country. What do you think? Does RFK take more votes away from, assume the race is Biden and Trump? Who does RFK take more votes away from?
I think that's a very tough call. And I've seen 3 polls in 3 weeks, all different.
Yeah.
One says he takes more from Biden. One says he takes more from Trump. One says it's dead down the middle.
Right.
Who in the world knows what it, especially, you know, in politics, from now till November is a lifetime in politics. Anything can happen. It can change dramatically. But I'll tell you that I have a lot of friends who are Republicans, highly sophisticated, who are considering voting for RFK Jr.
Yeah.
And wow, that just gets me because, you know, I think I told you, I follow his Twitter feed religiously.
Yeah, me too.
I don't miss a thing he says. And because I'm watching, look, I mean, I agree with like 80% of what he's saying now. And he could have pulled that right off my Twitter feed. But this guy is not for real. I have a long memory, a really long memory. I don't forget things. And I remember in 2014, he wrote an article called Jailing Climate Deniers.
Exactly.
Jailing, like putting people who disagree with him in a cage. That's what he's talking about. Okay, so I tried to find that article for you. Guess what? Oops, page not found.
Of
It's been
course.
taken down by EcoWatch for their buddy RFK Jr. Because, every time he would complain on Twitter about, oh, the Democrats are censoring me in Congress, I would comment, oh, yeah? How about your jailing climate deniers article at EcoWatch, 2014? It was the most radical thing I'd ever heard against the First Amendment. I mean, I've heard some radical things. We're exposed to cancel culture all the time, but very few of them, who work to cancel people are openly calling for people to be thrown into a prison cell. That's what jailing means. So now he's trying to walk it back, right? He's like, oh, I was only talking about corporate death for anyone who disagrees with me on climate change. So fortunately, I found, oh, by the way, deniers, as you know, is a term borrowed from the Holocaust.
Yes.
It's intended to really deeply insult to the, in the worst way.
Slander, yes.
Anyone who doesn't agree with him. Okay, I found my favorite meme. Everyone I don't like is Hitler, a child guide to online political discourse. Okay, so that's his approach. Anyone he doesn't like is Hitler. Let's not forget that. I was lucky I found a write-up in hotair.com about this 2014 article. So it dates back to 2014, comments on what he said, and then excerpts what he said so I could actually get my hands on a little bit of what he had to say. It says, activist Robert Kennedy Jr. denies he wants to jail climate change deniers. This is right after the article. He actually wants to, quote, execute climate villain corporations and think tanks. Okay, so you get in here. Let's take him in his own words, just so I don't get him wrong and we're all misunderstanding him unfairly. Here is what he had to say. Okay, laws in every state maintain that companies that fail to comply with prescribed standards of corporate behavior may be either dissolved or, in the case of foreign corporations, lose their right to operate within that state's borders. The rules can be expanded, and in contrast to the U.S. Supreme Court's recent rulings on campaign finance law, companies under state laws enjoy far less protection than human beings. New York, for example, his favorite state, seems to be, prescribes corporate death whenever a company fails to, quote, serve the common good and to cause no harm, unquote. And he's very colorful. Any state attorney general, so he's having the same discussion we just had, any AG with the will, the resolve, and the viscera to stand up to the dangerous and duplicitous corporate propagandists has authority to annul the charters of each of these big mercenary merchants of deceit. And AG with particularly potent glands, yes, it says that, potent glands, could revoke the charters of not just the oil industry surrogates, like American Enterprise Institute and Competitive Enterprise Institute. He or she could also withdraw state operating authority from the soulless, nationless oil companies that have sponsored big lie campaigns, that's in quotation marks, big lie campaigns, and force them to sell their in-state assets to more responsible competitors. So they can, disgorge your assets, or basically force you to sell them to someone else and get out of the state, run you out of the state. And he specifies, he's talking about, okay, Koch Industries, ExxonMobil, Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the Cooler Heads Coalition, the Global Climate Change Coalition, the ALEC, the American Legislative
Oh,
Exchange
right. Yeah.
Council,
Yeah.
Heartland Institute, State Policy Network. I mean, he goes on and on and on and on with everyone who needs to die. Corporate death because they disagree with him on climate change. I mean, this is who he is. There's the
Yeah.
real RFK Jr. And sometimes you can see the anger come through in the interviews. He just like loses his cool for a second and he goes out of character. At the same time that he wrote this article, he was helping Governor Cuomo lead the fracking ban effort in New York.
Exactly. As part of the River Keepers Coalition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, which has no basis in fact that his rivers are going to be polluted because of fracking.
Right.
So therefore, all the New Yorkers who are farmers or ranchers who have shale underneath their land and could be benefiting from this and need the money don't see it. And instead, they import their LNG from Russia and fund that war.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that same coalition is largely responsible for the fact that we haven't been able to build any pipelines from the Marcellus to the Northeast. And it's, you're right. It's who he is. Very mean-spirited guy who's really wrong about most things, but he emphasizes, he's been very clever. And you talked about it earlier. His campaigns have been very clever because he has really focused and emphasized those few issues where he really uses language almost indistinguishable from the things Donald Trump says or any of the other Republican candidates. It's really been a clever campaign so far.
I wonder how far back the planning for his campaign goes.
Because years. Yeah.
He didn't just decide this last year.
Right.
He's been planning this for a long time. And no one would love to believe him more than me that he has become like the one really reasonable, level-headed Democrat, and that people can line up behind a reasonable, level-headed Democrat.
It'd be nice to have someone like that.
Yeah, I mean, there are moments when like I want to believe him, I really want to believe him, but he doesn't disavow actually his past work. He'll try to explain around it. Now he's had it taken down, it appears, or EcoWatch took it down. Someone took it down. But he's not apologetic. And in fact, as he said openly on Twitter, a frack ban is part of his platform, which tells me he doesn't understand anything about geopolitics, like nothing. He should never be put in charge of anything if he can't understand the role of oil and gas in world politics, war and peace, who's rising in power, who's not. He doesn't understand that. So, it's too bad. He's a smart guy. I mean, there's a part of me that's empathetic to him. He has family members who clearly were killed for whatever principle they were standing on, whatever it was. I believe they died because of their work.
Yes.
And so there's a part of me as an American that really cares about that. And I admire people standing up knowing they could be in danger. Politics has always been a dangerous business. And that's too bad. But I like that he appreciates that part of it. I told a story I thought was really compelling in an interview. When his uncle was killed as president, he was about 14 years old, I think he said. And so he's old enough to remember and appreciate the moment, what had happened. And he said that, he was there when his dad heard the news and called Langley. And according to RFK Jr., it's not me. According to him, his dad said, Robert Kennedy said, "Did you guys do this?"
Right.
And that's one of those like moments that would really form a person. I mean, I would say RFK Jr.'s got some grit. I'd say he's not a very fearful guy. And I appreciate that. And maybe he believes in what he's doing. I don't know. But either way, it's so destructive. He doesn't understand. We got billions of people to feed on this planet. We wouldn't be able to do that without oil and gas.
Exactly. Yeah.
But he just doesn't get it. So, yeah. I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I know I sound like I'm being unkind, but it's just a lot of truth. He can handle it. And I think that people have to just be careful and have these conversations with the Republican friends who are liking his talking points. I have a really good friend who said that he's addressing all of these important issues. And I said, no, he's not addressing them. He's tweeting.
Yeah.
He's tweeting, you know, anyone can do that. I think he's probably got a team of like psychologists and sociologists who study how people react to messaging. I'll bet he's got a whole sophisticated operation.
Oh, I'm sure he
there.
does. Absolutely.
To make sure he can peel up. I mean, I just believe the goal is to peel people up of Donald Trump ultimately and help out his team. And I think I might have mentioned to you that I have a friend whose immediate family member sees RFK Jr. on about a weekly basis. So they're acquainted.
Yeah.
Who said absolutely what he's trying to do is tank Trump. So I didn't get that firsthand. This is the hearsay within hearsay within hearsay that you saw in the Paxton trial every time they marched somebody up to the stand. So I wouldn't approve of it for convicting anyone for a capital crime or anything, but I do think that these people are credible and honest, and that's my interpretation of what he's doing. I called it way in advance that he would not run as a Democrat. He would run as an independent, absolutely, so that he could pull Republicans off, because Republicans probably won't cross party lines very easily. I mean, you kind of know.
Right. And that's my next question. Do you think Republicans considering this right now, as they learn more and more about him, it's a year to election day, do you think they're likely to have second thoughts and think better of supporting a guy who's wrong about pretty much everything other than just a small handful of issues that they care about?
Yeah, so a campaign that's false is difficult to sustain over the long term, because while you and I might think that most of the Biden campaign is false promises, the fact is his supporters believe him.
Yep.
Whereas RFK Jr. is on very tenuous ground, right? He's kind of new to a lot of people, and he has that really romantic, old style Democrat family people like to believe in that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are a lot of reasons why, and, he's an interesting guy. And I have to say, believe it or not, I have the same voice impediment that he has, which is called dystonia. It's a form of dystonia. And so I'm empathetic. He's a man who'll go in a national campaign. The first time I heard his voice, then I knew, mine is a minor case compared to him, obviously. And I thought, nobody is going to listen to this guy. He's so uncomfortable to listen to. But you know what? Like, people actually kind of admire that he goes with the hand. And I do too.
I think it is disconcerting at first, right, to hear him. Yeah. But then once you get used to it and understand what's happening with him, it's almost like I don't even notice it anymore, really, when I hear him. And I've listened to him a lot because like you, I think a year ago, I actually kind of thought, well, he's very interesting and I might actually be able to support this guy because he's just so right about several key issues. But then the more you research his background and learn more about him, and he tweets things out like, I'm going to ban fracking, like that's a good idea. Then you realize, oh my goodness, no, this guy's just a menace. I mean, he's really at the end of the day, kind of a menace to all of us.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I was the same way. I mean, I was really interested to find out if he had some kind of a transition, he does his interviews. He has this big cross behind him.
Mm-hmm.
He's got all the symbols, and maybe he is a really devout Catholic. I don't know. I have no idea. But I'm just saying, it has all the markings of trying to appeal to a certain demographic. And so politicians should never be judged by their words, only by their actions.
Yeah.
Always. And, because talk is cheap and political talk is cheaper than most. So give him no
That's for sure.
Yeah, give him no credit for that. We only want actions. So and look, when he was writing an article about jailing climate deniers, he was not a college student,
right,
20 years old.
He was a grown damn man, wasn't he?
He was a grown butt man. Yes, he was. He was in his 50s, and he had been in the movement for decades. And I think we all know that there's a lot of money moving through the green movement that's questionable. And he, as a candidate, would know that better than anyone, right?
Yep.
He would know that whole world very, very well. And
Yes, he
so
would.
it was in it for a long time. So I just, he could explain to you if he were very forthright. He won't. Why, for example, the bird conservation groups are not protesting the wind turbines, the wind blades. He could explain why the environmental groups are silent on whales washing up on the East Coast. He could explain that. He would
Yeah, he
understand
could.
why that's not happening, or where were the environmental groups in East Palestine, Ohio, when a train derailed? That's my part of the world. I cared. Where were they? He could
Yeah.
explain that.
Nowhere
So
to be found.
yeah, because the money trail explains it all,
Yes,
and
it
he would know
does.
that.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my take on him. I'm sorry it's not more rosy. Obviously, if he's ever elected, he won't be. I will not be invited to take an appointment in any Kennedy administration.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm disqualified for my views and my brazen free
Well,
speech.
me too. Me too. Listen, we're up against time. Before we go, I want you to give everybody information on where they can find you and your show and everything you do.
Okay, so the easiest way to find me is JackiDaily.com. That's Jacki with no E, daily like everyday.com. Of course, I'm on the X as Jacki Daily host in Facebook and Instagram. And you can subscribe for free just about everywhere that quality podcasts are found, like theblaze.com. So I'm on Glenn Beck's network, iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you like.
Wherever podcasts can be found, right?
Quality podcast. Yes, that's right.
And
So thank you so much,
folks,
Dave.
yeah, thank you. And Jacki's podcast is fantastic. You really should link to it and give it a listen. It's really great. She has fantastic guests, not me, but other
David
people.
Blackmon.
And yeah, right. Anyway, thank you very much. This has been great. And thanks to our extraordinary producer, Eric Perel, the Sandstone Group, for hosting our podcast, and to the folks at the U.S. Oil and Gas Association for being our sponsors. I'm David Blackmon. That's all for now.